I'm Madeline, 36, and my world imploded on a Tuesday afternoon when my husband's email appeared in my inbox. 15 years of marriage reduced to a cold legal document and a photo that burned into my brain. Derek, with his 23-year-old girlfriend, lounging in our Lake Tahoe vacation home. They were smiling. He'd sent divorce papers, like a business transaction, expecting me to crumble. Instead, I felt something unexpected rise within me. Not just heartbreak, but calculated fury. That day, I made a decision that would methodically dismantle everything he held dear. Before I continue this story, take a moment to let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that subscribe button and brace yourself for what happens when the wrong woman is underestimated. Derek and I were the couple everyone envied. At least that's what we projected to the world. I built my career in marketing, climbing to an executive position at one of Seattle's top firms through relentless work and strategic thinking. My professional skills served me well, though I never imagined I'd need to deploy them against the man who vowed to love me forever. We met in business school at Stanford. Derek possessed that magnetic confidence that drew everyone's attention when he entered a room. Tall, with dark hair that always fell perfectly into place, piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through you, and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person who mattered. That smile was his greatest weapon, and I fell hard for it. Our courtship moved quickly. Weekend trips to wine country, sailing on the bay, late nights, discussing our ambitions over expensive whiskey. 6 months after our first date, he proposed at sunset on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. The diamond was flawless, the setting platinum. Everything with Derek was always pristine, curated for maximum impact. I said yes without hesitation, believing I'd found my perfect match, someone as driven and ambitious as me. The wedding was featured in Seattle Social magazine. 300 guests at the Four Seasons, overlooking Puget Sound orchids, flown in from Thailand, a custom Vera Wang gown. Looking back, I realized the entire event was more about appearance than substance. We were creating our brand as a couple, not celebrating our love. After the honeymoon in Bali, we settled into our life together, purchasing a historic Craftsman in Queen Anne that we meticulously renovated. Derek's career in investment banking took off his natural charm and ruthless instinct, making him a favorite with clients. 3 years into our marriage, he left his firm to start his own hedge fund, Archer Capital. Within 5 years, he was managing over $500 million in assets. Our social circle consisted of Seattle's elite, tech executives, real estate developers, old money families. Saturday nights were charity galas and fundraisers. Sundays were brunches with carefully selected friends at exclusive clubs. We maintained memberships at the right places, vacationed at the right resorts, supported the right causes. Our lives were a performance, and we were very good at our roles. Children were discussed and mutually decided against. We'd be mediocre parents but exceptional professionals, Derek had reasoned. Why compromise? I agreed, though. Sometimes when I saw friends with their families, I felt a fleeting emptiness. Derek never seemed to experience the same doubt. On our 10th anniversary, Derek surprised me with the Lake Tahoe property, a modern mountain lodge with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. The deed was in both our names, though I later discovered my inheritance from my grandmother had provided the majority of the down payment. The lake house became our retreat from the relentless social obligations of Seattle. There we could relax, read books by the fire kayak at dawn, and drink wine on the deck as the sun set behind the mountains. It was on that deck that we had our last real conversation as a couple, though I didn't know it at the time. Labor Day weekend last year, nearly 11 months before the email. Something had felt different about Derek for months. More distant, constantly checking his phone, working later hours. I'd noticed but pushed my concerns aside, attributing his behaviour to work stress. That evening on the deck, wine glasses in hand, I asked him if everything was all right. "Of course," he said, the rehearsed smile appearing instantly. "Just navigating some complicated deals. Nothing for you to worry about." "You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you? With us, I mean." He reached for my hand, squeezed it. "Maddie, we're solid. You and me against the world, remember?" I wanted to believe him. So I did. Even when he hired a new executive assistant a month later, young blonde with legs that seemed to extend forever. Even when I found the receipt for a Tiffany bracelet in his suit jacket while doing laundry, a bracelet I never received. "It's for my mother's birthday," he explained smoothly. Wanted to surprise her. His mother called 2 weeks later to thank me for the lovely scarf we'd sent for her birthday. I said nothing to Derek about the discrepancy. I was already building walls around my heart, preparing for something I couldn't yet name. The business trips increased. New York, London, Miami. Always with his assistant Amber to manage logistics. The late nights became more frequent. "Major client crisis," he'd text. "Don't wait up." I maintained the facade. Hosted dinner parties where I laughed at all the right moments. Attended charity events on his arm. The perfect supportive wife. Posted carefully filtered photos on social media of our seemingly perfect life, all while the distance between us expanded into an ocean of silence and politeness. Even as suspicion grew like a shadow in my mind, I kept it contained. We had built this life together, brick by brick, year by year. Acknowledging the cracks in the foundation meant risking the entire structure. So I ignored the signs, suppressed the doubts, and continued playing my role in our carefully constructed reality, until that Tuesday in September when the email arrived and the perfect illusion we'd created shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces, cutting me as they fell. The day began like any other. I woke at 5:30, completed my morning run along the waterfront, showered and dressed in a navy Armani suit I'd bought for an upcoming client presentation. Derek's side of the bed hadn't been slept in, but that wasn't unusual. "Emergency with an Asian market portfolio," he'd texted around midnight. "Sleeping at the office." I'd become accustomed to such messages over the past several months. At the office by 7:30, I spent the morning preparing for a major pitch to a potential new client, a global athletic wear brand looking to revamp their entire digital marketing strategy. The account would add millions to our agency's annual revenue and solidify my position for the upcoming CMO consideration. Everything was riding on this presentation, scheduled for 2 o'clock. At 11:47, as I was reviewing my slides one final time, the email notification appeared on my screen. The subject line was sterile, "Legal documents requiring your attention." Derek's work email address. No message in the body, just 2 attachments, a PDF titled "Dissolution of Marriage Archer" and a JPEG image. I opened the PDF first, my brain initially processing it as some kind of elaborate mistake. 26 pages of legal language beginning with a petition for uncontested divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The document was already signed by Derek, dated 3 days earlier. His attorney had helpfully flagged the spots where I should sign with yellow digital sticky notes. The terms were outlined clinically: division of assets, financial arrangements, a proposed timeline for finalising everything within 30 days. He wanted a clean break, minimal fuss. Reading between the lines of legal jargon, the message was clear sign: quickly take, what's offered, disappear quietly. Then I opened the image. Derek and a young blonde woman sitting on our Tahoe deck furniture, the handcrafted Adirondack chairs I'd commissioned from a local artisan, the lake sparkling behind them in late summer light, his arm around her shoulders, her head tucked against his chest. Both smiling directly at the camera as though posing for a Christmas card. I recognized her immediately, Amber Collins, his executive assistant. 23 years old, recent graduate of Washington State. He'd hired her personally, overriding HR's recommended candidates. In the photo, she wore my bathrobe, the white Turkish cotton one that had been a gift from Derek on our last anniversary. For those mornings at the lake, he'd said, the one with my monogrammed initials on the pocket that was now covering her heart. My hands began to shake, the office around me blurring at the edges. The casual cruelty of sending this image, of them in our special place, her in my robe, was so deliberate it took my breath away. This wasn't just informing me of an affair or ending a marriage. This was a power move designed to devastate, to establish dominance in the narrative of our ending. I barely made it to the private bathroom attached to my office before the nausea hit. Kneeling on the cold tile floor, I heaved until there was nothing left but bitter bile. Splashing cold water on my face, I stared at my reflection, pale skin, dilated pupils, a woman in shock. My assistant knocked tentatively. Madeline, the creative team is ready for the pre-pitch meeting. Tell them I'll be there in 5. I called, my voice steadier than I felt. Somehow, I made it through the next hour. Reviewed creative concepts, suggested minor tweaks to the campaign strategy, delegated final preparations to my team. No one seemed to notice I was operating on autopilot, that inside I was screaming. At 1:15, I called our agency president. Paul, I need to ask a huge favor. I've come down with something sudden and severe. Food poisoning, I think. Can you handle the athletic wear pitch? Of course, but Madeline, this is your baby. Are you sure? I've prepped the team thoroughly. They're ready. I trust you to close it. I forwarded him my presentation notes and disconnected before he could ask more questions. 30 minutes later, I was driving home in a fog, the Seattle rain matching my internal storm. Our house, the beautiful craftsman we'd spent years perfecting, looked exactly the same from the outside. How strange that the world hadn't visibly shifted when mine had been destroyed. Inside was different, his closet half empty. Dresser drawers partially cleared, the bathroom missing his toiletries. He'd been planning this, methodically removing his possessions piece by piece when I wasn't home. How had I not noticed? On the kitchen island sat an envelope with my name handwritten on the front. Inside, a brief note. Madeline, I've tried to make this as painless as possible. The marriage isn't working for either of us anymore. Amber and I are starting fresh. I hope you'll sign the papers quickly so we can both move forward. The terms are fair. Derek, fair. As if he could possibly define what was fair in this scenario. I moved through the house like a ghost, cataloguing the evidence of his calculated exit. His home office cleared of important documents. The safe in the closet emptied of his passport and the vintage Rolex collection. The Macallan 25, his prized scotch, gone from the bar cart. He'd taken exactly what mattered to him and left everything else, including me. That night, I finally broke. Curled on our bed, now just my bed, clutching his pillow that still smelled faintly of his cologne, I sobbed until my throat was raw and my eyes swollen shut. I screamed into the emptiness of our home. I threw the crystal frame holding our wedding photo against the wall, watching it shatter like my trust in him. And then, around 3 a.m, something shifted inside me. A cold clarity washed over my pain. I sat up, dried my eyes, and truly saw the situation for what it was. Derek expected me to fall apart completely, to sign the papers in emotional distress without scrutinizing the details, to retreat in humiliation while he paraded his young girlfriend around in the life we had built, to surrender. He had forgotten who he married. 15 years together, and he'd underestimated me so severely it was almost comical. In his narrative, I was already cast as the discarded wife, the sad footnote in his story of reinvention with a younger woman. Sitting in the wreckage of my marriage, surrounded by the debris of my tears, I made a decision. I would not play the role he'd written for me. I would not sign anything, not yet. I would not give him the quick, clean break he desired. Instead, I would remind Derek, slowly, methodically, and with absolute precision, exactly who he was dealing with. For 3 days, I went dark, called in sick to work, turned off my phone and closed the blinds. Not because I was broken, but because I needed absolute focus to gather intelligence and formulate my response. Derek had been planning this for months. I would not counter without proper preparation. On day 1, I made a single call to Sharon Weiss, Seattle's most formidable divorce attorney. Known for representing tech executives and old Seattle money, Sharon had a reputation for being both brilliant and merciless. Her retainer was astronomical, but I had my own savings account Derek knew nothing about. Money I'd been setting aside from bonuses and inherited funds. Bring every financial document you can access, Sharon instructed over the phone. Bank statements, investment accounts, property, deeds, tax returns. And don't respond to anything from him or his attorney until we meet. I spent the day compiling files, printing statements, and creating a comprehensive inventory of our assets. The more I dug, the more irregularities I noticed. Large transfers from our joint accounts to unknown destinations over the past 6 months. Investment holding that had mysteriously decreased in value. Property in Aspen I'd never heard of, purchased 3 years ago and sold last month. By evening, a disturbing pattern was emerging. Derek hadn't just been planning to leave me, he'd been systematically hiding assets and rearranging our financial landscape. My marketing executive salary was substantial, but Derek's hedge fund had generated the majority of our wealth. If I accepted the divorce terms he'd offered, I would walk away with less than 20% of what should rightfully be mine under Washington's community property laws. On day 2, I met with Sharon in her downtown office overlooking Elliott Bay. Her sleek silver hair and impeccable Chanel suit projected exactly the confidence I needed in my corner. "This is classic pre-divorce financial engineering," she said, examining the documents I'd brought. "He's been moving assets offshore, I'd bet my license on it. And these divorce terms..." She tossed the papers aside with visible disdain, insultingly inadequate. "He's not just leaving you, he's trying to erase your financial contribution to the marriage." "What's our next move?" I asked. "We investigate before we respond. Right now, he thinks you're emotional paralyzed by the shock. Let's use that misconception to our advantage. I'm bringing in a forensic accountant who specializes in high net worth divorces. Meanwhile, maintain radio silence with Derek. Every day he doesn't hear from you increases his uncertainty." On day 3, I met Michael Brennan, the forensic accountant Sharon had recommended. Methodical and meticulous, he spent hours walking me through what he would be looking for. "People who hide money leave trails," he explained. "Bank wires have records, property has titles, even offshore accounts connect to identification numbers. It's not about if we'll find the hidden assets, it's about how many we'll discover." That afternoon, I used my research skills from 15 years in marketing to conduct my own investigation. I created a detailed timeline of Derek's business trips, cross-referenced with large financial movements. I catalogued changes in his behaviour alongside changes in our investment portfolio. I documented every mention of business associates I'd never met, properties I'd never visited, deals he'd been unusually secretive about. A picture began to form, not just of a cheating husband, but of a man engaged in potentially illegal financial manoeuvres. Derek had always operated in the grey areas of investment law, justifying aggressive strategies as creative compliance. Now I wondered if he'd crossed from grey into black. The 4th morning, I finally turned my phone back on. 37 missed calls from Derek, 64 text messages ranging from confused to concerned to angry. "Did you get the email? Call me when you've reviewed everything." "Madeline at least acknowledged receipt of the documents." This silent treatment is childish. We need to move forward. My attorney needs your response by Friday. Where are you? Your office says you've been out sick. This isn't like you, Madeline. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. The last message had come just an hour earlier. If I don't hear from you by noon, I'm sending someone to check on you at the house. I smiled at the phone. He was getting nervous. Good. I texted back a single line. I'm fine. Need time to process. We'll be in touch when I'm ready. His response was immediate. That's not how this works. There are timelines involved. I didn't reply, imagining his frustration building with each passing minute. Derek, who planned everything to the last detail, who expected the world to bend to his schedule, was now facing an unpredictable variable, me. That afternoon, I returned to work. Colleagues gave me sympathetic looks. News travels fast in professional circles. I held my head high, thanked them for their concern about my illness, and immersed myself in client work. I needed to maintain my career trajectory regardless of what happened with the divorce. More importantly, I needed to appear stable and composed to everyone in our shared professional sphere. After hours of consulting with Sharon and Michael, I had the beginnings of a plan, one that would unfold in careful phases and ultimately give Derek exactly the opposite of what he wanted. Not a quick, quiet divorce that preserved his reputation and finances, but a methodical dismantling of everything he valued. He had sent those divorce papers and that photo, assuming I would crumble. He didn't realize he had just declared war against someone who knew all his vulnerabilities, all his secrets, and all his weak points. Someone who had nothing left to lose. 1 week after receiving the divorce papers, I made my first calculated move, absolutely nothing. I didn't sign the papers. I didn't contact Derek's attorney. I didn't respond to his increasingly urgent messages beyond that single text. This wasn't paralysis. It was strategy. Every day of silence cost him both financially and emotionally. His carefully orchestrated exit strategy required my compliance to work. On day 8, I finally answered one of his calls. Madeline, finally! What the hell is going on? Why haven't you signed the papers? His voice carried that familiar edge of controlled impatience, the tone he used when business deals didn't move at his preferred pace. Hello, Derek, I said calmly, the phone call recording as advised by Sharon. I'm still reviewing everything with my team. Your team? You've hired an attorney that's unnecessary and expensive, Madeline. The terms are more than generous. I let out a small laugh. We clearly have different definitions of generous and different definitions of marriage, apparently. Look, I know you're hurt. That's understandable. But dragging this out won't change anything. Amber and I... Let me stop you right there. I interrupted, my voice, steel wrapped in silk. I don't care about Amber. I care about the financial discrepancies I've discovered while reviewing our accounts. A beat of silence. Then, what discrepancies? The unusual transfers from our joint investment account, the property in Aspen that appeared and disappeared from our portfolio without my knowledge, the offshore transactions to the Cayman entity. Another longer silence. I could almost hear the calculations happening in his head. Those are standard fund operations. Nothing to do with our personal finances. His voice had changed, a nearly imperceptible tightening that most people would miss. But I wasn't most people. Really, because the timing aligns perfectly with your exit strategy. It's almost as if you've been moving assets beyond my reach for months in preparation for this divorce. That's absurd and unprovable, and frankly, it sounds like you're making accusations that could damage my professional reputation. Be careful, Madeline. Just like you were careful when you emailed me divorce papers with a photo of you and your girlfriend in our vacation home in my bathrobe. I kept my tone conversational, but the barb hit its mark. I shouldn't have included the photo. It was insensitive. It was many things, Derek, but mostly it was a mistake. What does that mean? Now there was real tension in his voice. It means you showed your hand too early. It means you gave me a reason to look very, very closely at everything. It means I now have questions about your business practices that others might find interesting as well. Are you threatening me? Disbelief coloured his words. I'm simply telling you that I won't be signing anything until I have complete transparency regarding our marital assets. My attorney will be in touch with yours. I ended the call before he could respond, my heart pounding, but my resolve strengthened. Sharon had coached me carefully on what to say, enough to rattle him, but not enough to constitute an actual threat that could be used against me. The following weekend, I made my first public appearance since receiving the divorce papers. The Anderson Cancer Institute Gala was the premier charity event of the fall season, and I knew Derek would be attending, likely with Amber. Our social circle would be watching carefully to see how the drama would unfold. I arrived fashionably late, having spent the afternoon at Seattle's most exclusive salon. My usual subtle highlights had been transformed into a striking platinum blonde that complemented the crimson Valentino gown I'd purchased for the occasion. The dress, backless with a dramatic slit, was a departure from my usual conservative elegance. Conversation stuttered as I entered the ballroom. I caught Derek's stunned expression across the crowd, Amber frozen at his side in a black dress that suddenly looked childish and uninspired. I smiled graciously at acquaintances as I moved through the room, accepting flutes of champagne and deflecting curious questions with practiced ease. "Madeline, you look incredible," said Jennifer Meyer, wife of a prominent tech CEO. "We've been so worried about you." "That's very sweet but completely unnecessary," I replied warmly. "Some life changes on the horizon, but I'm embracing new possibilities." I moved on before she could probe further, making my way to Thomas Bradford, one of Derek's oldest friends and a major investor in Archer Capital. "Thomas, how lovely to see you," I said, kissing his cheek. "How is Sarah still enjoying the new gallery space?" We chatted comfortably about his wife's art venture, the conversation flowing naturally until he awkwardly mentioned Derek. I was sorry to hear about, well, must be difficult. I met his eyes directly. Life surprises us sometimes, but I've always believed that everything happens for a reason. Some endings are necessary for truth to come to light. He shifted uncomfortably. Truth. I nodded, taking a sip of champagne. It's fascinating what you discover when you start really examining the details of your life. The financial details especially. Thomas's expression changed subtly. "What do you mean?" "Oh, just that transparency is so important in all relationships, business and personal." I placed my hand lightly on his arm. "Speaking of business, how has your experience been with Archer Capital, Derek? Always speak so highly of your investments with the fund." His eyes darted briefly to where Derek stood watching us intently. "It's been profitable, though there have been some unusual strategies lately that I've questioned. Really, I'd love to hear more about that sometime. Perhaps lunch next week. I suddenly find myself with many questions about Archer's operations." I smiled brightly. "Purely out of intellectual curiosity, of course." Thomas agreed to lunch with visible unease, exactly the response I'd hoped for. I knew he would report this conversation directly to Derek, planting the first seed of concern about what I might know and who I might talk to. Throughout the evening, I repeated variations of this performance with key players in Derek's professional circle, subtle enough that no one could accuse me of sabotage, direct enough that the implications were clear. I was not going away quietly, and I had questions about Derek's business that made people uncomfortable. The coup de grace came in the ladies' room where I encountered Amber washing her hands at the marble sink. Seeing me, she froze, colour draining from her already pale face. "Madeline, she stammered. "Amber," I acknowledged with a polite nod. "Lovely to see you outside the office environment. The dress is cute. BB, isn't it?" Her hand went self-consciously to the polyester fabric of her off-the-rack dress. Yes, I wanted to say, no need for explanations, I interrupted smoothly. Though I am curious, did Derek tell you he was separated when you started sleeping together, or did that particular lie come later? Her eyes widened. He said you two had an understanding, that the marriage was just for appearances, that you knew about other people. I couldn't help the genuine laugh that escaped me. Did he now? And did you believe that I knew my husband was bringing his assistant to our vacation home, that I was fine with you wearing my clothes? Tears welled in her eyes. He said the robe was a gift for me, that he bought it specially. My monogrammed initials on the pocket must have been confusing then. I opened my clutch, checking my lipstick in the mirror with steady hands. How long have you two been involved, Amber? The truth this time. 8 months, she whispered. Since I started at Archer. Not 6 months, as Derek had accidentally revealed during our call. 8 months. Almost as long as she'd been his assistant. The timeline suddenly made more sense. He's going to leave you too, you know, I said conversationally, reapplying my lipstick. Men like Derek don't change. They just update to newer models when the current one becomes inconvenient or starts asking too many questions. You don't know anything about us, she said, a flash of defiance breaking through her discomfort. I know he's been moving money offshore for months in anticipation of this divorce. I know he's lied to his investors about fund performance. I know he took you to Bora Bora in March on what he told me was a solo business trip to London. I snapped my clutch closed. And now I know he told you our marriage was open, which is particularly creative fiction. Her face crumpled in confusion. The London trip. But we posted pictures together on Instagram. Yes, I found those particularly enlightening, especially since he called me every night from what he claimed was his London hotel room. I moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Amber. The prenatal vitamins in your purse, visible when you opened it for the valet ticket earlier, Derek will never allow you to keep that baby. Children don't fit his lifestyle narrative. I suggest you start planning accordingly. The shock on her face confirmed my suspicion, sparked by the distinctive bottle I'd glimpsed earlier. I hadn't been certain, but her reaction told me everything. He doesn't know yet, does he? I asked softly. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. Well, that should make for an interesting conversation. Good luck, Amber. You're going to need it. I left her standing there, shell-shocked and suddenly questioning everything Derek had told her. Another seed planted. Later, as I was preparing to leave the gala, I felt Derek's hand on my arm pulling me into a quiet alcove. What the hell do you think you're doing? He hissed, fury barely contained beneath his public smile. Talking to Thomas about Archer's financials, interrogating Amber in the bathroom. Having conversations, Derek. Isn't that what these events are for networking, catching up with friends? You're trying to sabotage me. It won't work. I'm simply seeking information. Any sabotage is entirely your doing. I patted his cheek lightly. By the way, congratulations are in order, I believe. Fatherhood should suit you. His face went blank with confusion, then shock, as understanding dawned. What are you talking about? Ask Amber, though you might want to wait until you're somewhere private. She seemed rather emotional about it. I stepped away, but he gripped my wrist. Madeline, stop whatever you think you're doing. Sign the divorce papers. Take what's offered. Don't turn this ugly. I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. You turned this ugly when you sent me that photo, Derek. I'm simply responding in kind. As I walked away, I felt his eyes burning into my back, but I didn't turn around. The evening had been a success. Phase 1 of my plan was complete, establishing that I would not be a passive participant in his narrative, that I had questions about his business practices, and that I was willing to air those questions in public. The next day, as expected, Derek's attorney reached out to Sharon, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss the terms of the divorce settlement. Sharon responded that her schedule was unfortunately fully booked for the next 2 weeks, but she would be happy to review any improved written offers in the meantime. The improved offer arrived within hours, nearly doubling what had initially been proposed. Sharon forwarded it to me with a single comment: "He's scared. Hold firm." I had no intention of accepting any offer yet. This was just the beginning. 3 days later, I filed my official response to the divorce petition, a comprehensive counterclaim that requested full financial disclosure, forensic accounting of all marital assets and depositions of Derek's business associates. The document was delivered to Derek at his office in front of his executive team by a process server who called out his name loudly in the middle of a staff meeting. That evening, my phone lit up with his call. I didn't answer, but I smiled at the 15 increasingly angry voicemails he left. The last one simply said, "You have no idea what you've started." He was wrong. I knew exactly what I had started, and I was just getting warmed up. While social maneuvering had rattled Derek, the real battle would be fought in the financial arena. He had built his identity on 2 pillars: his wealth and his reputation as a brilliant fund manager. I intended to systematically undermine both. Michael Brennan, the forensic accountant, had been meticulously tracing Derek's financial movements for weeks. 3 days after the gala, he requested an urgent meeting. "I've found something significant," he said, spreading documents across Sharon's conference table. "A pattern of transactions that doesn't align with legitimate fund operations." He walked us through his findings: regular transfers from Archer Capital's management fee account to a shell company in the Caymans, which then distributed funds to various LLCs. Those LLCs had purchased multiple properties and luxury assets that never appeared on any disclosure forms. This Mercedes S-Class purchased last month, paid for by one of the shell companies, but registered to a D. Archer. This apartment in Miami, purchased by another LLC but listed as a residence on a credit application Derek filled out for a private aviation membership. More damning were the discrepancies Michael had uncovered in Archer's reporting to investors versus the actual performance of certain investments. "He's been inflating returns," Michael explained, "taking money from new investors to pay promised returns to existing ones while skimming management fees off the top, regardless of actual performance." "That sounds like a Ponzi scheme," I said, the implications sinking in. "It has elements of one, certainly," Sharon agreed, "and it gives us significant leverage in the divorce proceedings, but it also raises ethical questions about disclosure obligations." We discussed options. I could use this information privately as leverage to secure a better divorce settlement, or I could pursue a more aggressive strategy that would involve regulatory authorities. "Before you decide," Sharon cautioned, "understand that involving the SEC would likely trigger an investigation that could lead to criminal charges. The financial settlement might ultimately be smaller because funds would be frozen and potentially subject to investor lawsuits." "This isn't just about money anymore," I replied after careful consideration. "Derek didn't just betray me as a husband. He's been lying to everyone: investors, regulators, business partners, people who trusted him with their life savings." The decision crystallized in that moment. This wasn't just about my revenge. It was about justice for everyone Derek had deceived. We developed a 2-track strategy: proceed with the divorce case while simultaneously preparing to report Derek's financial improprieties to regulatory authorities, timing each move for maximum impact. My first financial countermove was to freeze our joint assets. Derek had already withdrawn significant funds, but several high-value accounts remained accessible to both of us. Sharon filed emergency motions, preventing any further withdrawals or transfers pending the divorce proceedings. Derek's attorney immediately contested these motions, but the judge sided with us after reviewing the evidence of Derek's prior asset transfers. His financial mobility was now significantly restricted. Next, I secured our most valuable possessions. While Derek was distracted with Amber and the legal proceedings, I methodically inventoried and relocated items of particular value, my grandmother's jewelry collection artwork we had acquired family heirlooms. Everything was documented and moved to secure storage with notifications sent through proper legal channels that these items were being preserved pending final asset distribution. Derek's furious calls went unanswered. He was discovering that the personal access he had taken for granted to our home, our possessions, our shared accounts, was systematically being restricted. Most satisfying was reclaiming the Lake Tahoe property. After Michael traced the source of the down payment to my inheritance, Sharon filed a separate motion establishing my primary claim to the property based on separate property contribution. Additionally, since the title had both our names and Derek had provided Amber access without my consent, we successfully argued that his actions constituted abandonment of his property interest. The day the court granted my motion for exclusive use of the property pending final divorce settlement, I had the locks changed and the security system upgraded. That evening, I received a furious call from Derek. "You can't lock me out of my own vacation home," he shouted, foregoing any greeting. "The court seems to disagree," I replied calmly. "Perhaps you should have considered the implications of bringing your girlfriend there before the divorce was finalized." The judge found that particularly interesting. "This is my property too, Madeline. I paid for half of it." Actually, the financial records show that 70% of the down payment came from my inheritance, which is separate property under Washington law. Your contributions were minimal and undermined by your documented misuse of the property. The string of expletives that followed told me the message had been received. I had taken back what was rightfully mine, not just a piece of real estate, but a symbol of our relationship that he had deliberately tainted by bringing Amber there. While these maneuvers were personally satisfying, the larger strategy was still unfolding behind the scenes. Michael continued gathering evidence of financial improprieties, building a case that would eventually go to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Sharon prepared for depositions of key Archer Capital employees, focusing on fund operations and reporting practices. Derek, meanwhile, seemed to believe this was still just an aggressive divorce strategy, unpleasant but ultimately containable. His attorney made increasingly generous settlement offers, culminating in a proposal that would give me 40% of our documented marital assets. "He's getting desperate," Sharon noted as we reviewed the latest offer, "but he still thinks he can buy his way out of this." "He doesn't realize that I've seen the full scope of his deception," I replied, "or that I understand what it means." The forensic accounting had revealed that Derek's actual net worth was nearly triple what he had disclosed in the divorce filings. Hidden real estate offshore accounts, undisclosed cryptocurrency holdings. The web of concealed assets was extensive and meticulously constructed. More concerning were the irregularities in Archer Capital's operations. Client funds had been commingled with personal accounts. Investment returns had been systematically misreported. New investor capital had been used to create the illusion of successful trades rather than actual market performance. By the time we were ready to make our next move, we had compiled a devastating dossier of Derek's financial misconduct, evidence that would not just win me a favorable divorce settlement, but potentially send him to prison. The weight of this knowledge was both empowering and sobering. I was preparing to destroy not just Derek's marriage and reputation, but potentially his freedom. There were moments of doubt, fleeting questions about whether this level of retaliation was justified. Then I would remember the cold calculation of that email, the deliberate cruelty of the photo, the years of deception that preceded it, the investors whose trust he had betrayed alongside mine. Any hesitation evaporated. Derek had made his choices repeatedly and consciously. Now he would face their consequences. The first public crack in Derek's carefully constructed facade appeared on a rainy Tuesday morning in November, 7 weeks after he sent the divorce papers. The Wall Street Journal published an article headlined "SEC Examining Trading Practices" at Archer Capital, citing persons familiar with the matter, who reported regulators were looking into potential irregularities in how the fund reported returns to investors. The article was careful, using qualified language, and noting that no formal investigation had been announced. But in the financial world, even whispers of SEC interest could be devastating. The mere suggestion of impropriety could start an investor exodus. I hadn't leaked the information. There was no need. Once Michael had compiled sufficient evidence of potential securities violations, we had filed a formal whistleblower complaint with the SEC through appropriate channels. The fact that regulators had moved quickly enough for rumours to reach financial journalists suggested the evidence was compelling. Derek called me within minutes of the article's publication. "What have you done?" His voice was tightly controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. "I haven't done anything except examine our marital finances with appropriate professional assistance," I replied. "If that examination revealed issues requiring regulatory attention, that's hardly my fault. You've filed something with the SEC, don't deny it. I'm not required to confirm or deny any whistleblower actions, Derek, but if I were you, I'd be more concerned with preparing responses to regulator inquiries than with blaming me for your problems." His response was a string of threats: legal action, public humiliation, financial ruin, all delivered in increasingly desperate tones. "I've already experienced the worst you can do to me," I interrupted calmly. "You've already betrayed me, lied to me, attempted to steal from me, and tried to discard me. There's nothing left you can threaten me with." The silence that followed told me he recognized the truth of my words. By that afternoon, 3 major institutional investors had contacted Archer Capital, requesting urgent meetings to discuss the article. By the end of the week, withdrawal requests had reached 30% of the fund's assets under management. Derek was scrambling to contain the damage, issuing reassuring statements and offering fee concessions to keep investors from pulling out entirely. Meanwhile, the formal divorce proceedings continued. Sharon scheduled depositions of key Archer employees, including Amber. Each received detailed document requests focusing on fund operations, communication practices, and knowledge of specific transactions we had identified as problematic. Derek's attorney fought these depositions vigorously, arguing they were beyond the scope of normal divorce discovery, but given the evidence we'd already presented of commingled personal and business assets, the judge allowed them to proceed with some limitations. Amber's deposition was particularly illuminating. Young and naive, faced with formal questioning under oath, she revealed far more than Derek would have wished. Yes, their relationship had begun shortly after she was hired. Yes, Derek had told her his marriage was essentially over. Yes, she had been present during business calls, where certain investment returns were discussed differently than they were later reported to clients. Most damaging was her confirmation that she had witnessed Derek instructing accounting staff to prepare different versions of performance reports, internal numbers versus client-facing numbers. She didn't understand the legal implications of what she was describing, but the court reporter's transcript would prove invaluable to SEC investigators. 2 days after Amber's deposition, Bloomberg reported that Archer Capital had received formal subpoenas from the SEC regarding trading practices and client communications. The fund's remaining investors began a mass exodus, forcing Derek to institute gates limiting withdrawals to prevent a complete collapse. That same week, Derek was called to an emergency board meeting of Archer Capital. By evening, a press release announced he had taken a leave of absence to address personal matters, while an interim management team reviewed the fund's operations. In reality, he had been forced out by partners desperate to salvage what remained of the firm's reputation. As Derek's professional life imploded, Amber delivered her own blow. A mutual friend reported that after learning of the pregnancy, Derek had reacted not with joy, but with irritation, suggesting she take care of it before it complicated their situation further. When she refused, he had begun distancing himself, missing appointments, and finding excuses to avoid conversations about their future. The final straw came when Derek, increasingly desperate as his financial options narrowed, attempted to access our Seattle home to retrieve items he claimed were still his. Finding the locks changed and security upgraded, he had tried to force entry through a back door, triggering the alarm system and resulting in a police response. No charges were filed after I declined to pursue them, but the incident report entered the public record, adding another crack to his deteriorating image. The man who had once been celebrated in Seattle business circles as a financial wunderkind was now being whispered about as unstable, untrustworthy, desperate. 3 months after sending me those divorce papers, Derek reached out with a direct appeal. He asked to meet in person, suggesting neutral territory, a downtown restaurant where we had often celebrated business successes in happier times. Against Sharon's advice, I agreed, not out of sympathy, but out of curiosity. I wanted to see him face the consequences of his actions. Derek barely resembled the confident, polished man who had shared my life for 15 years. His expensive suit hung loosely on a frame that had lost weight. Dark circles shadowed eyes that darted nervously around the restaurant. His usual commanding presence had diminished to something almost furtive. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice hoarse. "I know you have no reason to do anything I ask." "Curiosity brought me here, Derek. Nothing more." He nodded, fingers tapping anxiously on the table. "I need this to stop, Madeline. The SEC investigation, the investor withdrawals, the divorce proceedings. It's destroying everything I've built." "Everything we built," I corrected, "before you decided to throw it away. Yes, everything we built." He conceded, surprising me with this small acknowledgement. "I made a terrible mistake. With Amber, with how I handled the divorce, with everything. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, Derek. What you did was a calculated betrayal executed over months." He winced, but didn't argue the point. "I'm asking you, begging you to call off the regulatory dogs. Whatever financial settlement you want in the divorce, it's yours. Just help me stop this investigation before criminal charges are filed." The desperation in his eyes was real. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the connection we had once shared, the history of 15 years together. Then I remembered the photo he had so cruelly attached to the divorce papers, and any hesitation vanished. "The SEC investigation isn't mine to call off, Derek. Once certain information reaches regulatory authorities, the process has its own momentum. But you triggered it. You can tell them you were mistaken, that it was divorce-related animosity." I shook my head slowly. "That's not how securities law works, and you know it. The evidence stands on its own, regardless of how it came to light." "Then I'm finished," he whispered, deflating before my eyes. "The preliminary findings are damning. If this goes to formal charges, I'll lose my securities license, possibly face jail time." "Actions have consequences," I said simply. "You chose your actions. Now you face their consequences." He looked up, anger briefly flashing through the defeat. "Is this what you wanted all along? Not just divorce, but total destruction. I wanted a faithful husband and an honest marriage. When you made that impossible, I simply pursued the truth about our marriage and about your business practices. The destruction is entirely self-inflicted, Derek, Our meeting ended shortly afterward with no resolution and no reconciliation. As I watched him walk away, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt not triumph, but a strange emptiness. The man I had loved was gone, replaced by this diminished figure facing the ruins of his own making. 2 days later, the SEC announced a formal investigation into Archer Capital for securities fraud, misrepresentation to investors, and commingling of funds. Trading in the fund was suspended. Client assets were frozen pending review. That same afternoon, Derek was photographed being escorted from Archer's offices by security carrying a single box of personal items. The image was captured by a business reporter tipped off by an anonymous source. Not me, though I certainly didn't mind the public documentation of his fall. Amber called me that evening, her voice thick with tears. "He's left me," she said without preamble. "Said he can't handle the additional stress right now. Said we should reassess after the baby comes." "Are you surprised?" I asked, not unkindly. "No," she admitted. "You warned me. I just didn't want to believe it. What will you do now? Move back home to Portland? My parents will help with the baby." She paused. "I'm sorry, Madeline. I believed what he told me about your marriage. I should have known better." "Yes, you should have," I agreed. "But Derek has always been persuasive when he wants something." After we hung up, I felt a surprising sense of closure. Amber had been a symptom, not the cause of our marriage's end. Derek's capacity for deception had ruined multiple lives, not just mine. The final act played out swiftly after that. With criminal charges looking increasingly likely, Derek accepted a plea deal with federal prosecutors. He would plead guilty to securities fraud and misappropriation of client funds, pay substantial fines, and serve a reduced sentence of 18 months in federal prison. Our divorce was finalized the week before his sentencing hearing with terms overwhelmingly in my favor. I received the Seattle house, the Lake Tahoe property, and 70% of our documented marital assets. Additionally, the court ordered Derek to pay my legal fees and a substantial settlement representing the undisclosed assets that forensic accounting had uncovered. Derek surrendered to federal authorities on a grey January morning 15 months after sending me that email with divorce papers. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing or watch the news coverage. There was nothing left to see or say. The man who had arrogantly assumed he could discard me with impunity, who had expected me to crumble in the face of his betrayal, had instead lost everything: his freedom, his reputation, his wealth, and any chance at the new life he had envisioned with Amber. I hadn't set out to destroy him so completely. I had simply refused to play the role of victim he had assigned me, refused to accept less than I deserved, and refused to remain silent about the truth. Once I discovered it, the photo he had so carelessly attached to those divorce papers, intended to hurt and humiliate me, had instead been the catalyst for his own undoing, a single cruel action that initiated a chain of consequences he never anticipated. That perhaps was the most fitting revenge of all. 3 years have passed since I opened that email that changed everything. I'm sitting on the deck of my Lake Tahoe home, not our home anymore, but truly mine, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. The Adirondack chairs have been replaced with a comfortable outdoor sectional, better suited for the small gatherings I now host here regularly. Nothing remains to remind me of that photo that once burned into my brain. The divorce settlement ultimately left me in a stronger financial position than I had ever expected. The Seattle house sold for well above asking price, in a hot market, allowing me to purchase a smaller but more modern condo in the same neighborhood. I kept the Lake Tahoe property, renovating it completely to erase any lingering memories and make it truly my own space. Professionally, the scandal surrounding Derek initially created uncomfortable moments at work. Colleagues didn't quite know how to address the elephant in the room. that my husband was making headlines for securities fraud while our divorce played out in public. I addressed it head-on in a meeting with our agency's leadership team. I know there are questions and concerns about my personal situation, I stated calmly. I want to assure everyone that I had no knowledge of or involvement in my soon-to-be ex-husband's business improprieties. I've been fully transparent with authorities. My focus remains entirely on our clients and our work. My straightforward approach, combined with the unwavering quality of my performance, gradually silenced any doubts. 6 months later, when the position of Chief Marketing Officer opened unexpectedly, I was the unanimous choice to fill it. The promotion came with increased responsibilities, but also greater flexibility to shape my role. I expanded our agency's focus to include more mission-driven clients, finding personal satisfaction in applying my skills to causes I believed in alongside our commercial accounts. Socially, the aftermath of Derek's downfall proved revealing. Some friends disappeared immediately, either taking his side or simply uncomfortable with the public nature of our split. Others revealed themselves as mere acquaintances interested in the drama, but not in providing genuine support. A few surprises emerged. Thomas Bradford Derek's old friend, who I'd spoken with at the gala, reached out months after Derek's sentencing. "I owe you an apology," he said over coffee. "I suspected something wasn't right with Archer's reports for over a year, but I didn't dig deeper. Didn't want to know, maybe. When you hinted at issues that night, I should have paid more attention for everyone's sake." These conversations helped me recognize how much of my social circle had been built around Derek's preferences and connections. Gradually, I rebuilt my relationships on more authentic foundations. I reconnected with friends from college and early career days who had drifted away during my marriage. I developed new friendships based on shared interests rather than social status. Therapy played a crucial role in my healing process. Weekly sessions with Dr. Levine helped me work through not just the betrayal and its aftermath, but the patterns in my marriage that I had normalized over 15 years. "You became comfortable with emotional distance," she observed in one particularly insightful session. "Derek's charm and periodic, intense focus trained you to accept scraps of connection and mistake them for intimacy. These realizations were painful but necessary. I had to acknowledge my own role in maintaining a marriage that had prioritized appearance over authenticity, success over genuine partnership. While nothing justified Derek's betrayal, understanding the dynamics that preceded it helped me avoid repeating patterns in future relationships. The most common question people still ask is whether I regret how aggressively I responded to Derek's betrayal, whether the total destruction of his life and career was proportional to his offense. I don't frame it that way. Derek's downfall wasn't solely my doing. It was the natural consequence of his own choices and actions over years. The financial fraud that ultimately sent him to prison wasn't something I fabricated. It was something he committed and I exposed. Had he conducted his business ethically, my divorce strategy would have been limited to ensuring a fair settlement. The truth is that Derek's betrayal of me was just one facet of a character defined by deception. He betrayed his clients by misrepresenting their investments. He betrayed his business partners by exposing them to legal liability. He even betrayed Amber with false promises and abandonment when complications arose. My response wasn't about revenge, but about refusing to be another silent victim of his manipulation. The comprehensive nature of his downfall speaks more to the extent of his misconduct than to any excessive retribution on my part. As for Derek himself, he served 14 months of his 18-month sentence at a minimum security federal prison camp in California. Upon release, he moved to Arizona, where a former college roommate offered him a position at a small real estate development company. His securities license was permanently revoked, his reputation in financial circles destroyed. The brilliant career he had built, like our marriage, was reduced to cautionary tales and whispered gossip. Amber returned to Portland as planned. According to mutual connections, she gave birth to a daughter and eventually married a local restaurateur. Derek provides financial support but has minimal involvement in the child's life. Perhaps that's for the best. My own life has evolved in ways I never anticipated when we were together, without the constant social obligations and image maintenance that characterized my marriage. I've discovered genuine passions. Wilderness hiking pottery, mentoring young women in marketing. I've traveled solo to destinations Derek would have dismissed as too rustic or unconventional. Dating again at 39 has been an exercise in patience and self-discovery. I've had a few meaningful relationships, though none has progressed to long-term commitment yet. I'm more careful now, more attentive to subtle warning signs, more willing to prioritize my own needs and boundaries. Recently, I've been seeing Michael, a landscape architect, who designed the renovation of my Lake Tahoe garden. He's thoughtful and genuine with an artist's perspective and an outdoorsman's spirit. Our connection developed slowly built on shared interests and values, rather than social compatibility or professional advantage. When he stays over, he makes coffee in the morning without being asked and remembers how I take it. Small things, but they matter now in ways they never did before. The email that Derek sent with those divorce papers and that devastating photo was intended to end our story on his terms. Instead, it began a new chapter entirely of my making. While I would never have chosen this path, I can acknowledge that the woman I've become in the aftermath is stronger, more authentic, and ultimately happier than the woman who built her life around being the perfect corporate wife. There's a certain poetic justice in that transformation. Derek sought to discard me for a newer model, treating me as an asset that had depreciated over time. Instead, I emerged more valuable to myself and to others, while everything he prized crumbled around him. That's not revenge, that's reclamation. The sun has nearly disappeared behind the mountains, now the lake waters deepening from gold to indigo. In the growing darkness, I can barely make out the spot on the shore where Derek and I once planned to build a dock, but never quite got around to it. Next spring, I'm finally going to complete that project, not as a painful reminder, but as a symbol of following through on promises to myself. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't destroying the other person, but rebuilding yourself into someone they can no longer touch or diminish. Someone who recognizes their own worth so clearly that no one else's assessment matters. That's the life I'm creating now, one conscious choice at a time, not defined by what was done to me, but by what I chose to do afterward, not marked by Derek's betrayal, but by my own resilience. As twilight settles over the lake, I raise my wine glass in a silent toast to the woman I've become, and to the unexpected strength that emerges when the life you thought you wanted is replaced by the one you actually need. Have you ever faced betrayal that forced you to rebuild your life? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that betrayal isn't the end of their story. It might just be the beginning of a better one. Thank you for listening to my journey from heartbreak to reclamation. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful transformations come from the most painful beginnings.